Hello students, welcome back to the NEET lectures. This is my first lecture for your NEET syllabus from your 11th standard. Chapter number 1, the living world. It's a short duration lecture. I will be taking sub-units, small units from the chapter. Now let's start with the chapter. We are starting the chapter with what is the meaning of the word living. Living is nothing but which includes characteristics or features such as growth, reproduction, replication, self-organization, response to a particular stimuli, then showing homeostasis, cellular organization, metabolism or biochemical reaction, interaction with other cells in the vicinity and with other living organisms, heredity, showing adaptation to change in the environment or the surrounding area, and the last parameter is evolution. What are all these points? These points are nothing but the characteristic feature of a particular living organism. How will you define an organism to be called as a living? With all these parameters starting from the growth till evolution, you can include those parameters for a living organism. So whether all living organism will exhibit these parameters, or what is the difference between the living organism and a non-living organism? This is what is our point of study. Now, when you talk about characteristics of life, it includes growth and development, reproduction, heredity, homeostasis, metabolism, cellular structure and composition, and the response to the stimuli which is created by the environment. So, according to your definition, living organism, these are the open systems that maintain homeostasis. They are made up of cells. They have a life cycle. They undergo various biochemical reaction catalyzed by enzymes, which you call as metabolism. They can grow. They can adapt to their environment. They can respond to the stimuli. They can reproduce. They can evolve. All these are nothing but the parameters or characteristic feature of a living organism. Next, what is growth? How will you define growth? Whether growth is really a defining characteristic feature of a living organism, let's see. Here we are going to compare the living organism with that of a non-living organism. When you talk about growth, it is nothing but increase in the mass and increase in the number of the individual or the number of cells. A multicellular organism grows by cell division. When you compare unicellular and multicellular, you can say unicellular organism are the one which has got single cell. You can say multicellular organisms are the one which has got many cells. Okay, multi means many number of cell. But how is this many number of cell existing in an organism? By the process of cell division. A cell divides, giving rise to next division, next cells, a new cell. Like that, one cell will give rise to the other cell. So this is nothing but the multicellular organism consisting of large number of cells. So the growth is really a characteristic feature of only a living organism. This is what is our point of view. When you discuss about growth, you will come to know that you cannot consider growth as only a parameter for a living organism. Even a non-living organism will grow. For example, if you talk about a mountain, if you talk about hill, what is over there? Mountain, hill, all these are non-living objects. But non-living objects, in this case, you can see that the non-living objects are also growing by accumulation of the sand. So, you cannot consider growth as one of the defining feature or characteristic feature of just a living organism. Even a non-living organism will undergo growth, but up to a certain extent. Okay. Now, cell division is a process of reproduction. Cell division is a process of reproduction. So, you can say growth and reproduction as a mutually inclusive event. Mutually inclusive event in unicellular organism. That means growth and reproduction will occur simultaneously in unicellular organism. When you talk about multicellular organism, growth and reproduction, these are mutually independent. They don't occur simultaneously. You call it as mutually exclusive events. Okay, cell division in an unicellular organism can also be observed in vitro. In vitro means the one which is carried out in a test tube, or the one which is carried out in a petri dish, or the one which is carried out under microscope. So those cells which can be divided not in vivo within our system, inside the body of an organism, but at the same time cell division can also be done outside the system, in a test tube, in a proper, in a in a lab. Okay, in a biochemical, in a microbiological lab, a pharma lab, you can carry out the process of cell division even in outside the organism. That is called as in vitro studies, taking those studies carried out in test tube or in petri dishes or seen under the microscope. Now, when you say the difference of growth in non-living object and a living organism, in both cases a mass increase in the mass occurs. The same what I told you all, that even in mountains you will see that there is increase in the size. At the same time, when you say in the living organisms, the growth occurs internally. It occurs internally. There are various metabolic reactions which takes place in the living organism. It is not just the accumulation of matter in the body of a living organism, and growth is an irreversible process in living organism. Once a person is growing from a child to an adult, it's not like that from adult to child the person will come back. No, it's an irreversible process. Growth is an irreversible process. So growth can be seen even in non-living object. So you cannot consider growth as a proper defining property of a living organism. Okay, now what is the next parameter? Next parameter is reproduction. Now what is reproduction? Reproduction is the ability to produce new individual organism of the same kind. Non-living things, they do not have the property to reproduce themselves. Okay, and reproduction can occur sexually as well as asexually. That means reproduction can take place by sexual reproduction as well as asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction means involvement of two different parents, at the same time male gamete and a female gamete. Asexual reproduction means involvement of a single parent. Okay, and it will give rise to offspring which is genetically identical to that of the parent. You call it as a clone. Asexual reproduction is seen in lower organisms. In fungi, millions of asexual spores are produced, and these asexual spores, they multiply, they spread, and they give rise to new a fungi body, a fungal body. You can see over here, it's a conidiophore. Conidiospore is undergoing germination, okay, and that gives rise to mycelial formation. Mycelium, it differentiates. It gives rise to aerial hyphae, vegetative hyphae, and again the spores are formed, conidiospores, and this conidiophores in turn gives rise to a new mycelium. This is what is asexual mode of reproduction. In yeast, this is an example of yeast. In yeast and in hydra, it is an asexual mode of reproduction. In yeast, if you can see, there is a bud formation and there is this nucleus, this two body which you can see over here, these are the nucleus. So these nucleus, what happens initially, there is a single nucleus. This nucleus will undergo replication, will give rise to two nuclei, and that in turn will give rise to the separation of this nucleus. One will remain in the parent, the other will be remaining in the daughter cell. So finally you will get a parent yeast and a daughter yeast with a separate nucleus. Next, budding in hydra. Again in hydra you will see small buds start appearing from the surface of the parent body, and then later on this bud, it gets detached from the parent and it will give rise to a young hydra. Okay. Next, in planaria, there is one more mode of reproduction which you call as a fragmentation. You call planaria as a flatworm. The common name is flatworm. In fragmentation is a type of asexual reproduction. Here, a part or a fragment of this particular, so what you call a planaria or flatworm, it can give rise to the other part. That means if this particular portion, if this particular posterior part of the planaria, if it is cut and only if anterior portion is there, so what will be the situation? The situation will be the anterior part of the planaria will give rise to the posterior part. Like that, you will have a formation of the whole planaria. So this is called as regeneration by a fragment, and the process is fragmentation. It's a mode of asexual reproduction. A parent planarian divides into two fragments. Each fragment in turn will give rise to a new organism. Now next is the fungi, filamentous algae, the protonema of mosses. All of them, they multiply by fragmentation. Okay, this is an example of fragmentation in mosses. This is an example of fragmentation in the fungus. This is an example in Spirogyra. Here what you can see in mosses, here you can see that this is a particular parent, a parent moss, and that will undergo what you call asexual mode of reproduction, and it will give rise to the daughter mosses, which is identical to that of the parent. Same goes for fungus as well as Spirogyra. In Spirogyra, what you can see? Fragment 1 you can see, fragment 2, fragment 3 is formed. Each of this fragment will grow, and that will give rise to the parent Spirogyra. Next, in bacteria and in amoeba, binary fission is a method of reproduction. Binary means two. Bi means two. So what is this binary fission? It is a mode of reproduction. It takes place in bacteria as well as amoeba. Now in this bacteria and amoeba, if you can see, this is a parent bacteria. It is undergoing replication. That is, first of all, DNA duplication takes place, then the cell begins to divide in the center, and finally you will get daughter cells, and that daughter cells will be identical to the parent cell. Now when you talk about amoeba, same goes over here. In amoeba, first this is a parent cell, the nucleus they divide, and then the cytoplasmic division, which you call it as what you call cytoplasmic division cytokinesis, nucleus division as karyokinesis. Both, first it's the karyokinesis, which is nucleus division, then it is cytokinesis, which is cytoplasmic division. It results into two daughter cells. Okay, these are all the examples of binary fission. Then comes the binary fission in Euglena and Paramecium. This is in case of Euglena and this is in case of Paramecium. Even over here, it's a binary fission. It divides into two and it gives rise to two daughter cells. This is the mode of asexual reproduction. Next is metabolism. You can define metabolism as a biochemical reaction. Those reactions which takes place in our body, in our system, under the control of enzymes or because of the enzymatic action is called as metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions is nothing but the sum total of all chemical reaction which occurs in an organism. It is of two types. One is anabolism and second one is catabolism. Okay, anabolism is nothing but a synthesis process, a biosynthesis. Catabolism is a degradative process. Non-living objects, they never exhibit metabolism. Okay, because non-living objects, there are no enzymes, there are no reactions within non-living objects. Fine. Now, metabolic reactions can be carried out in vitro, in the test tube, outside the cell, outside the body, in a cell-free system, in a laboratory. Okay, a metabolic reaction carried out in a test tube is neither a living or a non-living. It's just a reaction. So metabolism is a defining feature of all living organisms. Next, this is a diagrammatic representation of metabolic reactions, anabolism and catabolism. As you can see here, when there is an anabolic reaction, that is this particular portion, ATP is required, energy is required. And when energy is required, what happens over here is the precursor molecules, what do you call, those molecules are formed. There are macromolecules formation. From the precursor small molecules, macromolecules are formed, large molecules are formed, and then there are various structures like membranes are formed, ribosomes formation, then there are cellular process taking place. Okay, then there are what do you call those macromolecules, biomolecules like carbohydrates, lipids, all these are formed by anabolic reaction. Then what is catabolic reaction? Catabolic reaction is the one in which energy is released. Energy is released in the form of ATP. That is what is catabolism. Okay, now here what is shown, we will be having those energy storage, carbohydrates, lipids, those are taken, and what happens with it? They are degraded. They are degraded at the same time, they are in the form, they are lost, and the heat energy is lost, okay, during the catabolic reaction. Next is cellular organization. All living organisms, they are made up of cell. How will you define cell? It is a basic unit of life. It can perform various life processes independently. You cannot find any of the cells in a non-living object. There are no cells in a non-living object. So you can define cellular organization as a defining feature characteristic of a living organism. What are the levels of organization? If you start with cell, a cell, it gives rise to tissue. A tissue gives rise to organ. An organ gives rise to organ system. An organ system gives rise to an organism. At the same time, an atom gives rise to molecule or a compound, and a compound gives rise to organelle, and the organelle is present within the cell. This is about a cellular organization. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the ability to sense their surroundings or environment and respond to that particular stimuli which is given by an environment. That stimuli can be physical, chemical or biological. How sensitive you people are, how sensitive we are towards a change in the environment is nothing but called as sensitivity. For example, the seasonal breeding, photoperiodism, etc. So how conscious we are, how aware we are, what are the various awareness or how conscious we are with respect to the changing environment is nothing but called as consciousness. Consciousness cannot be shown by a non-living object. It can be shown only by a living object. So consciousness is a defining property of a living organism. Patients which are lying in the hospital, which are in coma, they are not a self-consciousness. They don't show this self-consciousness, but they are not a non-living object because their organs, their parts are still functioning. Even though they are dependent upon ventilators, some of their organs are still functioning. Metabolism still goes inside their body. So you cannot consider a patient lying in a hospital under coma will be a non-living. They will be a non-self-consciousness. Thus, living organisms are self-replicating, evolving and self-regulating interreactive systems capable of responding to the external stimuli. All living organisms, present, past and future, they all are linked with each other by some or the other means, and their common factor is their genetic material which is inherited from one generation to the other generation. Thank you. We will be meeting for the next lecture which is in continuity with the living world.